Now we are coming towards the disadvantages of friction and the advantages of friction. Well, disadvantages mainly, that is, whenever there is friction between the two surfaces, there is production of heat, that is, heat is distributed to the surroundings, or if there is a particular machine part and it is operating, then between the parts there will be a lot of friction and heat will be dissipated, or heat can possibly destroy the insulations in that particular machine. So, friction is a disadvantage in most of the cases, mainly in the machine parts, and we find that if the friction among the parts is very high, a lot of heat will be developed, and if that heat overcomes the ignition temperature, the machine parts will begin to burn. Now we can put it like this: there is a significant amount of energy of a moving object is wasted in the form of heat energy. That is what I have explained you earlier to overcome the force of friction. Another thing is the force of friction restricts the speed of moving vehicle. If a truck or a body or an aeroplane is moving, its motion will be restricted by the air resistance. So force of friction restricts the speed of moving vehicles. The efficiency of machines decreases due to the presence of force of friction. This we have discussed just earlier now. The force of friction causes lot of wear and tear in the moving parts of the machine. So the moving part of the machine, there will be a lot of friction, and due to that, the parts will be damaged. And if we find that between the parts, the friction is very high, we will find after some time the heat produces so much that the parts will begin to burn. This is what produced in the last concept, that is sometimes a machine gets burned due to the force of friction between different moving parts. Now we come towards the advantages of friction. We have discussed earlier also, and once more we are reviewing the advantages of friction. Like when a person is moving, at that time friction is helpful in the motion of a person. We can put it like this: a force of friction helps us to move on the surface of earth. In the absence of friction, we cannot think of walking on the surface. That's why we fall down while moving in a smooth surface. If it is highly polished surface, there are chances of our slipping. The next thing, the force of friction between the tip of pen and the surface of paper, that helps us in writing on the paper. If there is no friction, we will find that pen will start running on the paper, but it will not write. So we can put it like this: it is not possible to write on a glazed paper as there is very small force of friction. The force of friction between the tires of the vehicle and the road helps the vehicle to stop, because if there is no friction, there will be no opposing force, and we apply the brakes, we don't find that the vehicle will stop. So the force of friction between the tires of the vehicle and the road helps the vehicle to stop. When brake is applied, in absence of friction, the vehicle will slide off the road when brake is applied. Now, moving belt remains on the rim of the wheel because of friction. So, wheel and surface of the wheel have the friction. The force of friction between chalk and the blackboard. It's a similar example like pen and the paper. So we write with the help of chalk on the blackboard because there is a lot of friction on the surface of blackboard. Thus, we observe that irrespective of various disadvantages of the friction, it is very difficult to part with it. So we cannot remove the friction at all. So friction is necessary evil also. Now, methods of reducing friction. There are plenty of methods of reducing the friction. However, friction cannot be 100% reduced. Well, one of the method is the surface must be highly polished, or in the machine parts, there must be ball bearings. So we can put it like this: as friction causes the wastage of energy, so it becomes necessary to reduce the friction. Friction can be reduced by the following methods. That is polishing the surface, as I have just now explained, but we can put it like this. We know that friction between the rough surface is much more than between the polished surfaces. So we polish the surface to reduce the friction. The irregularities on the surface are filled with polish, and hence the friction decreases. And another thing is lubrication. That is, among the screws, nuts and bolts, the friction can be reduced by lubrications. That is, lubricating it with oil or grease. So to reduce the friction, lubricants like oil or grease can be used. Now, by providing the streamlined shape, a proper shape, when a body, for example, bus, train, aeroplane, etc., moves with high speed, there will be air resistance. That is, air will cause the friction, opposing motion. The effect of air resistance on the motion of objects is decreased by providing them streamlined shape, and that is what indicated in the ball bearings. So converting sliding friction into rolling friction, since rolling friction is much less than the sliding friction, so we convert the sliding friction into rolling friction using the ball bearings. It is shown in the figure. So once more I will explain that we have seen the figure of the ball bearings. Since the rolling friction is much less than the sliding friction, so we convert the sliding friction into rolling friction. This is done by using the ball bearing arrangement. Ball bearings are placed between the axle and the hub of the wheel as shown in the figure. The ball bearing tends to roll around the axle as the wheel turns, and as such the frictional force is diminished.